Nice.
So,
Yeah.
and it was one that I thought maybe I had to go on, but thanks to work drama, some of the like upper management of my company is going instead of me. So I'm all like,
Nice.
that's fine.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like a nice little vacay, a little bit like less tension,
Yeah.
right?
I still have to like get some work done because there's another like quarterly review for one of the projects
Oh,
that I need to, but I just get to do it on my time. So
you'll love tonight's presentation because she has like connections to physics and stuff like that. And every time I do these, I always think of you, like because I'm like, this is up your like this is your alley, like this is your deal. So Um, yeah, so actually, while we're waiting, let me pull up the presentation and then actually, I'll probably just go ahead and get started. They can catch up. I can post it for them. All right, I'm going to share my screen. You guys know the drill. It takes me a second to figure this out. Hang on. All right, so we do our monthly Nine Muses Zoom, and this month I wanted to focus it on Urania. So this is a little classical depiction of Urania here, one of the nine muses. And let me see if, oh, I do have the arrows tonight. Look, I'm getting so good at PowerPoint. I can't even believe it. All right. All right. So I'm going to break down a lot of different things tonight. I didn't want to overwhelm by putting out too much information, but I wanted to put out enough so that you guys felt like if it was a connection that you could work with it. And there's also a lot of astrology involved in this too. And I didn't want to overcomplicate that either. So I kept it very basic. But how to connect to Urania, and I'm going to describe her in more detail, but any sort of stargazing and meditation is kind of like a natural bridge. Anybody dealing with astronomy or astrology, you're going to have a natural bridge. Creative writing and poetry, and it doesn't have to be star themed. Any kind of creative writing and poetry is going to create sort of an energetic bridge to the muses in general. Anytime you're working on your intuition or your clairs, whether you're doing meditations to develop your clair or you are actively in a, guided clair state, you are going to have a bridge of connection. Now, Uranus, when Uranus is doing funky stuff in your chart or when Uranus is sort of prominent in terms of planetary influence, that is going to create a window of time where your connection to Urania is going to be very, very strong, especially in terms of manifestation. So exploration and discovery, especially of self. When we're talking about Uranian exploration, discovery, it's about self. So when we're growing, when we're learning, when we're looking at new ideas, we're taking risks. This is one of the muses. Not all of the muses are risk takers. She is one that really encourages risk taking because that's how we grow, right? We don't grow without taking risk. There's no reward. Symbols and imagery. So when I work with Urania, and if you guys have seen pictures of my Nine Muses altar, stars and constellations. I just did a Northern Lights painting acrylic on canvas, and before that, I had done an acrylic on canvas galaxy painting, and those are Uranian in nature, so it's to help connect to her more. Star maps, globes, especially, what I really like are the ones that light up and project the constellations. I have one of those. I think that's a really neat thing to use when you're working with Urania. Any depictions of constellations can serve as powerful symbols, especially when it comes to galaxy or celestial magic workings with her, which I will explain tonight. Constellations actually serve a really important part of Uranian magic. Celestial bodies. So, the moon, the planets, any celestial bodies can be incorporated into Uranian rituals. And one of the most important things, too, is water. And I talked about this last month when I was kind of doing a kind of vague overview of the nine muses. Water is a symbol of the vastness of the cosmos. So it connects to all the muses, but especially Urania. So when I do my service for the muses, I actually use dissolvable petition papers in that gold goblet that I pour water in. Water is an activation. I use sacred fire for activation, but water is a wonderful activation
Related.
of the muses in general, any one of the nine muses. Okay. So prayers and invocations, there's one specific invocation that works really well with Urania. Um, and so I wanted to share that with you guys. Um, it's very basic. I'm not going to read it out loud because we're not doing Uranian work tonight, but take a screenshot or I can email this to you. This is one of the classical invocations that before you start doing Uranian magic or start working with her or going into meditation, this is something that's been used for a very long time. So I wanted to share that with you so you had that in your toolbox. And again, I'm not going to read it out loud because we're learning, we're not working with her tonight. So connection to other deities, obviously Uranus, not just the planetary aspect, but Uranus is also that is a primal god in the heavens. She has a connection to Hera, the queen of the gods, goddess of marriage and family, goddess of wisdom and knowledge. And Aphrodite, actually, she has that Aphrodite Urania celestial aspect of herself. This embodies the refined and ethereal qualities of love and beauty, and she worshipped Urania. So if you do a lot of Aphrodite research or Aphrodite work, you'll actually be reading about that Uranian aspect with her, that celestial aspect of her. So Urania is able, of course, to foretell the future by the arrangement of the stars. A lot of her stories involve that. Now, these are actually divination methods. I know about them. I've tinkered with them, but they're not something I'm comfortable enough with to actually do for other people. And that is astromancy. So astromancy has a couple of different offshoots. The first one is rotomancy. This is a form of aeromancy. It's divination by observing stars, comets, and meteors. So it's basically the observation of atmospheric phenomena. This is very different from weather divination. I actually took a whole workshop on weather divination out in I can't remember if it was Baltimore or Atlanta, one of those two places. She's a published author. She has this whole book on weather divination. This is very different. Aeromancy is beyond, our basic atmosphere system. It's like, that galaxy atmosphere. And so that's divided up into meteoromancy. This is the observation of meteors or falling stars, and cometomancy, which is, and this was really big in ancient times. It was information gathered by observing the appearance of the comet tail. So all of these are divination methods connected to Urania. I find them all very fascinating. It does take a lot of research. I can tell you that. Like when I have worked with astromancy, it's a lot of kind of opening textbooks and reading and understanding what you're looking at because there's so much to look at, especially if you're using telescopes. So there is a lot of learning involved with this particular form of divination. But, if you're an astronomer, I mean, you'd probably be really, really good at this. So her backstory, the gods tasked her with decorating the night sky to guide us mortals. So she is always depicted with her globe and her rod. And what she did is she casted patterns of stars across the heavens, each telling a story of heroes, creatures, and gods, thus creating the constellations. She was also, of course, as I said, believed to be able to tell the future or divinate. And she did this by reading the stars and how they were arranged in the sky, reading the patterns and the shape for things to come. It was believed that she did look down upon early humans and notice that they struggled to comprehend the vastness of the night sky. And, like in a lot of cases, were anxious or scared of it because it was so vast. So she bestowed the gift upon them of astronomy, which is understanding, of course. She taught us how to read the stars, predict the seasons, and how to navigate the oceans because of that. So this is kind of her backstory, very, very short and snippet for you there, just to have a better understanding of who she is. So the original intent of all 9 muses basically was to augment the minds of us humans to the mind of the cosmos, right? The original function was to return us to our wholeness through the creative process. It's something that we start losing from the day that we're born, right? So the muses kind of turbocharge the evolution of our consciousness in this respect. So they are involved in the evolution of the mind. They are catalysts. They're very ancient. And, when you look at old paintings of them, muses, a lot of times you'll see that they kind of have a portal in their chest and the moon or the moonlight is flowing through or water is flowing through. And that is because, that is how they've always been depicted, like there are portals and you could see that kind of energetic flow through them to us. We're the seeds below. So they are the seeds of the original primal fire. When we talk about primal fire, they were the seeds planted at the beginning of time, just like the other gods and goddesses. And they are gifts that are open in time to access all time. And I know that can be a little confusing. Last month, we did the Akashic records. And so I always kind of refer to accessing the records the same way, opening those in time to access all time. So when you're ready, energetically ready, you can access them. And you have access to, the past, the present, and the future through work with the muses. So I think it's powerful work. What else is she connected to? Biology, physics, quantum physics, especially. I can't stress enough the impact quantum physics has on spirit, the spirit world, spirit work. Radionics cast is a good example. Divination, like I've talked about, I've gone to workshops and listened to old men, retired physics argue about, the quantum physics end of divination and what happens. But with Urania specifically, she has a very strong tie to these areas, basically the why and how things work. There is that psychological and spiritual side of quantum physics and physics. They go hand in hand. Um, and again, she's related to Uranus, so she's also a problem solver. So she helps, I think, with understanding in these areas, with development, with growth. So if these are areas that you work in or that you study, definitely she is a deity that you can tap into to help with comprehension, which some of this subject matter is very complex. So any kind of comprehension help is much, received well. So her symbols, again, the rod, staff, globe, stars, and compass. Her colors are blue, violet, black, and white. So if you were to do a devotional to her or have a small altar, like these are things you would want to incorporate. Offerings and devotions usually consist of wine, honey, bread, specifically honey bread, spring water, wildflowers. I'm always with the fire, you guys. Sorry. Again, we talked about the star, moon, and heavenly objects. Just the act, honestly, if you can't set up an altar, if you don't have the resources, the time, or the space, when you make efforts to do things like learn astrology, learn astronomy, learn rotomancy, that is an offering in and of itself. Like they recognize that. Like it may not be a tangible physical item you're leaving on a platform for them to take the spiritual essence from. The fact that you're going above and beyond and you're learning and exploring and taking in this information, that is an offering. That is something that will energetically charge the connection. Any work that you do with other deities, specifically Apollo, Hermes, and the other 8 muses, is going to attract her attention. It is considered devotional to her as well. She aids a lot of, again, astronomers, scientists, navigators. She helps people to excel in artistic and scholarly endeavors. It's a word, sorry. She is often associated with universal love and the Holy Spirit. Now, the Holy Spirit has many different names depending on what path you walk. I'm just going to refer to it as the Holy Spirit. During the Renaissance, she was considered the muse of Christian poets. So a little bit of background there. It's kind of interesting. Another thing that's interesting with her is so the planet Uranus is partially named after Urania, and so is a main belt asteroid 30 called Urania, which I'll get into a little bit tonight as well. And she was also part of the logo at the Institute of Astronomy, Geophysics, and Atmospheric Sciences at the University of Sao Paulo. So she is actually depicted even today in, very prominent astrology, astronomy aspects, which you don't always find. In modern society, they try to pretend like this stuff doesn't exist. So, I mean, so it's cool when you find like they're still being used in logos and stuff. So anyway, Magic aspect. So Urania can summon celestial power from the stars, specifically constellations, absorbing the powers associated with those and activating these through her body. Children of Urania, people who have devotionals to her, that are connected to her, have the same ability to kind of summon and take control over a smaller version of energy of the constellations, but you can harness that stardust, we'll call it, and turn it into tangible energy. So you're able to manifest this in different ways based on the constellation. So this is constellation work, right? So this is very simple, but complex at the same time. So say, for an example, let's use Orion. So Orion is one of the more popular constellations. He's the hero, he's the hunter. So if I was doing a spell where I needed strength, courage, fortitude, power, and I needed to kind of like just knock through some sort of like barrier, or if I needed to like win a battle, I would probably do galaxy magic involving Orion. Now, how do you do that? So you can do that through visualization, which I'm going to share with you. You can do that through altar work, like I use sacred fire. You can use whatever element you connect to, but I may make an Orion board out of petition paper, and I may, burn that along with my petitions. Whatever you feel speaks your words the loudest, do it. There's no wrong way to do this kind of work. You're basically pulling from one point of energy, transmuting it, and putting it out towards a specific intent. So if you're looking for courage, get some pictures of Orion, write out your petitions, burn it in a fire, dissolve it in water, bury it in the earth, whatever works best for you. Cassiopeia is another popular one. And Cassiopeia, as we know, has the elements of pride and punishment. She is actually chained down in her throne because she said some things she shouldn't have said about Andromeda, her daughter, being the most beautiful thing to ever exist. And because of her pride, she was punished by being chained down. So if I was doing a spell where I wanted to get somebody to be humble, I wanted to humiliate them because they're prideful and their ego is in charge and doing nasty things. Kind of like revenge work. It's kind of like that reap what you've sown work. I would probably do a Cassiopeia constellation cast. So again, I would use pictures and petitions to represent Cassiopeia. I might even do a painting or something that represents on fire safe canvas, of course. Always be safe. Always be safe. But I might do a painting, and I may even use my petitions, turn them into sigils, and put that in the painting somehow. And then I would burn that in a sacred fire. You guys might do something different. You might toss it in a flowing stream. You may bury it in a sacred area. There's lots of ways that you can activate it. There's lots of ways to activate. So that would be Cassiopeia, for example, working with constellation galaxy magic. Now, I also wanted to put in combinations because, like, when we do root works and we do radionics and things like that, we are sometimes mixing intents. We may have a multifaceted petition. So a common one is a mix of 4 constellations that are pulled from that represent love, jealousy, and betrayal. And that is, again, Cassiopeia, her husband Cyphus, their daughter Andromeda, and then Perseus, who, of course, was in love with Andromeda. Now, you don't need to know mythology, but it helps. It definitely helps. You might be spending a lot of time on Google. But, I mean, if this is something that calls to you, the time is worth the investment. So say, for example, I'm doing a cast because I'm in love with somebody, we're, married, and there's a third party creating interference, or we don't, there's something going on with a sourcing angle. I'm worked up about it. I'm probably projecting some not great energy. Maybe I'm jealous. Maybe I'm frustrated. This would be a good 4 constellation mix to not only heal and repair and restore my energy and my connection to my partner, it would also help to eliminate that third party or that sourcing, or to minimize it and to kind of reestablish a balance. So I would probably do maybe a charcoal drawing, or maybe even, I might make something in the paint program on my PC that represents these four constellations. I would do my petitions, maybe some sigils, state my intent and burn that in a sacred fire. So these are all ways that you can use that galaxy magic or that constellation based magic. If you have a statue of Urania, that's going to amplify things. Leave her an offering when you do these cast works. I got my statue of Urania right off Amazon, you guys. I mean, you can find her on Amazon. Of course, cleanse her when you receive her and give her some adornments, but that is also going to amplify whatever you're doing. Now, when we talk about spells, when you're working with the muses, spells can look very different. Spells can be paintings, drawings, crafts, like I think Sherry earlier today, she was sending me pictures. I think she was knitting, crocheting these adorable like key rings. I mean, that can be magic. Writing out your spell, singing a spell, sound, sound is magic. I actually use sound for activation with the Muse service. Um, so all of this is magic. It doesn't have to be a big flash in the face like we're used to with root work or sacred fireworks. It can be something very, um, very creative, very quiet. And you don't necessarily have to destroy it. If you're painting a spell, put it on the wall for a couple of weeks. After it starts to manifest, maybe you want to take it down. I've known people actually to use the same canvas, and every time a spell manifests itself, they will paint over it in black and paint a new spell. And they'll do that 10, 15 times until that canvas isn't usable anymore. So that's another way to I guess with resources, make your resources stretch, and also to keep kind of drawing in the same deidal solicitations because you're using the same canvas. Now, there is another galaxy celestial magic aspect, that's visualization. I have this visualization here for you. I'm not going to read it out loud. I don't like doing that unless we're actually doing the work because I don't want to start anything. But I can email this to you. I'll post this after we've done it. Visualization is very simple. It's the river of moving time visualization. You just want to make sure you're in a tranquil, quiet space that's pretty undisturbed without a lot of distractions. You're probably going to be, I think with the muses, I like to work in the dark. Unless I'm doing a community service and then I want light. So I think if it's individual, dark with candlelight is nice. Incense is great. I always burn mugwort. Let's get honest here. I use mugwort and everything. I don't think there's anything I don't use mugwort in, but I think mugwort's great here. Calming music, Enigma. You guys remember Enigma from the 90s, right? That'd be perfect for working with the muses. Um, Even wearing something to represent Urania, or if you're working with one of the other muses. So, like with Urania, I would maybe wear something with stars or constellations on it, or I might wear like a violet colored robe or something. So, and this is going to walk you through the visualization that you're going to do. You may need to do this a couple of times to really kind of get the hang of it, but this in and of itself is also celestial galaxy magic. It's using energy to set an intent and activate an intent when we don't want to use something tangible. Some of us do better with intangible casts, so that's for you guys. All right, so I'm going to move on. I know I go really fast. Did anybody have any questions before I move on? No? Okay, great. You guys are awesome. All right. So let's talk about the asteroid Urania. It was discovered in July of 1854. And the reason I'm describing and explaining this to you is because I'm also going to be dabbling in Uranian astrology tonight. So this asteroid is a point in the birth chart that reveals individual cosmic connections. It was the 30th asteroid discovered. In its placement in your chart can reveal kind of how you integrate the vastness of that solar energy into your own life. Now, you can use astro.com to find Urania in your chart. That's a free site. You're going to want to use the additional asteroids feature. Also know that Urania has a rotational orbit around the sun that takes 3 to 6 years. So keep that in mind also. So solar returns and things like that, you're not really looking at that type of information. You're just looking at natal. Now, before I go into that, I want to tell you guys, most professional astrologers will agree, you need 3 or 4 charts to get a real good handle on, what's going on. If you have just a placidius geocentric chart, that's a great starting point. It gives you great insight. But for me, I'm going to need to see that. I'm going to need to see your Vedic D9. I'm going to need to see your second harmonics, and I'm going to want to look at your mid tree, or your midpoint tree. And why? Why are all these different elements of evolutionary and medieval and Western and Vedic astrology? Because when you combine them together, it fills in all the gaps, it amplifies aspects, and it answers questions that a chart, if you're looking at it singularly, might leave kind of open ended. Um, so I always recommend, if you guys are into astrology, look at these 3 or 4 different charts from those 3 or 4 different aspects, because you're going to find the strong correlations. You're going to find just more substance. You're going to have more definition in your purpose, your destiny. What can you expect? Why are certain things happening? So anyway, I'm sorry. I go on these astrology rants. Sometimes somebody in the group has to tell me to shut up and move on. Let's move on. All right. Uranian astrology. I'm going to move this over here. God, these bars are, I type too much. That's so again, this focuses on your midpoint tree. Why are there so many of these, as opposed to the traditional houses in the birth chart? So it's much more concise. It was developed in the 1930s, mid 19th century, as a new way of interpreting the cosmos. Right? Let me move. Oh, okay, that's gone. Great. So what this does is it harnesses points of energy which serve as catalysts for activity in your life. That's what midpoints are. They're catalytic points in your life that create something. The primary differentiating factor of Uranian astrology from more traditional astrology is really the placement and interpretation of the 10th house, or the midheaven. It's also known as the meridian, because here's the thing: in Western astrology, when we're looking at a chart, or you're looking at your chart, this house, the 10th house, represents your career, your public standing. Now, in Uranian astrology, because the midheaven is right there, this is a place where we find our soul purpose. It centers on you as the individual rather than your public persona. And so instead of focusing on what we're putting out into the world, this really centers around what we're putting into ourselves. So that's why it's really important, I think, for everybody to know what their midpoint tree is, which is Uranian astrology. Another distinction is that the substance of Uranian astrology is energy, not physical spaces or places like the planets. Now, the planetary influence is there, they are used, but this is energetic sourcing from your midpoints, from your midheaven. Big, huge differentiator. Now, this is, again, a system based on points of power that are referred to trans-Neptunian planets. Now, those of you who don't know a lot about astrology, you're probably like, what the hell is that? If you've ever looked at your Vedic chart, your Vedic charts will have your trans-Neptunian planets. So that's part of evolutionary and medieval astrology as well. Now, I use a program called Solar Fire. So if you guys have ever gotten a chart done from me, you've probably seen a lot of those trans-Neptunian planets on there. So the main 2 are Hades and Cupido. The others that are taken into account in your midpoints is Zeus, Kronos, Apollon, Admetos, Vulcanus, and Poisto. These are all points of energy in that midpoint tree that show hyper-specific patterns that do affect us, and our emotional responses to them. So it's a really great tool to kind of delve deeper, oh my gosh, deeper into your chart. It kind of helps, you to understand your personality, the motivations that you experience, your sensitivities. These aren't going to be found by just looking at your birth chart alone. You need a combination of charts. So this is a wonderful chart to really kind of understand. I really feel like the motivation aspect, like what is motivating us from a hidden angle that we're not seeing. I often find that in somebody's midpoint chart. It's the energy feeding your fire that you don't even sometimes have an awareness of. So it's nice to know what your trans-Neptunian planets are doing. Um, so moving on. Sorry. Where's my, oh, there it is. Okay. All right. So I'm still going. The meaning of the signs are the same, even though they are in midpoint form. So the difference here too is these usually spark events, connections, or sentiments. Again, think catalyst. This is your catalyst tree. We should just call it a catalyst tree and not a midpoint tree, honestly. Um, and I wanted to use some examples in here too. So your sun and moon midpoints. Okay, we're not talking about house affiliations. We're not talking about anything like that. But your midpoints, where your sun and moon are, those energize emotional desires and depths, meaning that you might during these periods be overthinking things, be kind of OCD, but you also might be really good at listening and more practical in your emotional approach. So, that's just an example of what the midpoint is going to let you know. So, in Uranian astrology, you're not casting that birth chart, you're using that midpoint tree, but it still is going to require where were you born, what day, what time, and I can't stress the importance of time enough. Okay, so here's the thing. The moon is important and it will shift every 15 minutes. So I always say, get me your birth time within 15-minute accuracy, because outside of that, there's going to be some variables that may affect things and how I'm reading your information. Um, so I know sometimes, and here's the thing, birth times can be tricky. There is a process if you don't have your birth time called a rectification. It's very complex. It requires almost like us sitting on a Zoom and talking for 2 hours while I look at pictures of you and I ask you about life events so I can figure out what the hell when you were born. But I do suggest it, if you don't know the time of your birth, I would suggest rectification, because I've seen astrologers do just the location, day, and year. And yeah, there's going to be some solid information in there. Your outer planets, your Saturn, your Uranus, your Pluto. These things are going to be pretty standard. But those closer, your Mercury, your Venus, your Mars. I mean, there's going to be so many shifts there that we're almost just guessing. So I don't like to guess. I never like to guess. So rectification if you don't know the time of your birth. Now, you can cast a harmonics chart, which is made, for those of you that aren't familiar with harmonics, it's a more complicated math. I hate math. Listen, astrology is 90% math. I don't care what anybody says. So a harmonics chart is made by dividing your birth chart by specific numbers. They're referred to as dials. So the first 32 harmonics use what's called a 90-degree dial. And I don't want to confuse you guys. I'm just kind of throwing this out here as a way to use a harmonics chart to get your midpoint tree. So that new chart that harmonics creates and with that 90-degree dial is going to give you the position of planets that are in those new divisions. So I would suggest fourth and eighth harmonics charts are going to be almost perfectly, not perfectly, but almost perfectly aligned to your midpoint tree. So say you're having a hard time really kind of nailing down this midpoint tree thing, try to run a fourth harmonic or an eighth harmonic. Those are going to be pretty accurate because those work under that 90-degree dial system. And they also work on pre-karmic conditions and some predestination factoring, which is kind of what the midpoints are tapping into, because that's energy, right? Midpoints are the middle degrees of two planets. They act as triggers and catalysts for emotion change and growth. They explain why you have specific reactions to certain people or situations. Now, all of us, I don't know many people who haven't experienced it where you've walked into a room and your energy shifts. Either it gets elevated because, wow, this is just a feel good place, feel good people, or it gets drained because you're like, holy shit, what's in here? You're tired, you're crabby. Energies of people and places affect us. There's no doubt about that. We've all experienced that. Midpoints can help you understand why. Okay. So you can apply that midpoint to any planet that falls within an orb of 1 degree. What does that mean? I don't expect you guys to get out compasses and start, doing all this. There's great programs out there that will do this for you. But if you're somebody like Lisa, here's the thing, like this is math you can do on your own. It's just time consuming. You're looking for planets that fall within 1 degree of an orb of influence, we call it. So like when I do astrocartography and somebody's moving and they want to know where they're going to be lucky at, where's the luckiest spot on the globe that I can move to, I am looking for a 1 degree orb of influence, maybe not necessarily maybe they're Jupiter line, but maybe it's a combination of Mars and Jupiter, whatever. The point is, in midpoints, it's 1 degree orb of influence. That's the orb of influence you need to focus on. So this is also good in partnering. So say you meet somebody, you like them, you start dating, you're thinking about taking things to the next level, but there's a couple of what if factors or red flags, and you're like, what the hell? Are we really a good match or what? I love astrology for this. Listen, there's not one man that I haven't interacted with where I haven't ran a shit ton of reports on them. And in some cases, I seen they were shit and I still went along for the ride. So it always comes down to personal choice, but it's nice to have insight into why they're going to be a piece of shit someday. So, so like say, for example, the person you're dating, their Pluto, aligns with your Jupiter midpoint. Okay, so what does that tell us? It means the relationship could be very destructive, but it is going to help you as an individual evolve into the person you were meant to be. Sometimes we need destruction to grow. So remember that. Now, when you're looking at charts, when you're looking at midpoint trees, especially in relationships, and you're comparing midpoint trees with somebody else and you're looking for correlations or problem areas, if you see red flags in that chart, if you see they have some heavy kind of lower frequency energy points that could be destructive, understand that you could still interact with this person. You could still have a connection. It might be a bit of a roller coaster, but at the end of the day, you're going to grow from it. You're going to learn a lesson. You're going to be stronger. You're going to be smarter. So I sometimes embrace those connections. You know why? Because I know they're going to challenge me and I know that I am going to reap a benefit from it at some point. So just keep that in mind. All right. So when it comes to planning events, midpoints are awesome. I actually use the midpoints tree function in a program called Solar Fire. I love Solar Fire. It's what I recommend to anybody who's even remotely interested in astrology. Midpoints help you discover ideal dates. Is it a wedding? Are you looking to get pregnant and have a child? Are you buying a house? Are you moving across country? Are you going to quit your job, start a business? All of these things, you can use your midpoint tree to look at catalyst windows of energy and what that energy is going to feed. So if I have Jupiter activating in my midpoint tree and I have a window of, say, 9 months where it's in full 1 degree orb of influence, that's when I'd probably open my business. That's when I'm probably going to take monetary risks. That's when I might advertise my business, market my business. Because Jupiter expands things, it grows things, right? So that's how we can use midpoint trees to find what date would work best for love, children, purchasing large items, all these things. So I definitely suggest midpoint trees for that. Looking at the transits of the stars with midpoints can also concisely monitor our mood. This is a good one too. So midpoint charts, again, they're very different than traditional charts. They are showing catalyst points. Now, if Saturn is in 1 degree orb of influence and it's catalyzing in your chart, if it is activating, understand that you may be going through a period where you are dealing with restriction and you're dealing with repression and you're dealing with a lot of sourcing coming at you at the same time. So you're going to probably be frazzled, exhausted, frustrated. So knowing this can help us pre-plan, right? So when we know when periods of time are going to be rough for us, if we know the transits are kind of looking sketch, we know to maybe do some planning to navigate that, to control it, to mitigate it. So I do suggest doing transits with the midpoints because they do help keep us grounded and in a good mood because we know what's happening, right? No surprises. All right. So I love this book by Roger Jacobson. If anybody's interested in Uranian astrology, this is the book. Man, I spent a lot of money on it. It's not even a first edition. It's like a fifth edition, and I still paid like $130 or something for it. But I think it's like 230 or something on Amazon right now. But if you can find it, hunt on the internet, it's got to be somewhere for cheaper, I'm sure. It is a wonderful book. It is very detailed. It is very, it's structured very simply. So, a simple layperson who isn't familiar with astrology could really learn a lot here. Um, the one thing too, and he talks about it, Roger Jacobson does in his book, not all midpoints spring rainbows and butterflies, right? And that's just the way it is. There is something called the hell point. Um, the hell point in your midpoint tree is a very intense midpoint between Saturn and Pluto. So you have Saturn creating limits and repression, and you have Pluto, which is very transformative but very obsessive, right? That energy is very obsessive. When these planets create that hell point, they create this very controlling, it almost is a sensation. You can almost feel like it's hard to describe. I've dealt with this, so that's why I wanted to throw it in here. It is very difficult to navigate. You could have all kinds of tools in your toolbox, and you may not be prepared to deal with this kind of midpoint, the hell point. So now, if this is activated by an astrological occurrence, it's going to put you in a major funk. When it is brought in by a third party, which is what happened to me, which was my second ex-husband. So when you are connected to somebody and this activation occurs because of the energy that's being shared, and it's also being heightened by this other person's chart, it creates a very toxic relationship where it's fueled by jealousy and resentment. And it basically feels like you're in hell, which is the name of the midpoint. And it may not be necessarily a relationship like I'm explaining with another person. It could be your relationship to your job, to your business, to how you handle money, to how you're taking care of your home, your animals. It could be a lot of different intercorrelating factors. But I'm telling you this because when you're looking at midpoint trees, if you see a midpoint being activated between Saturn and Pluto, get your big girl panties on. Get your big girl panties on, go get a bottle of wine and get ready. So I'm just telling you. And that is not just me. This is documented. I've read stories. I've had clients that have dealt with the hell point, and that's why I'm actually sharing it with you guys. Um, Two other things I want to throw in here before we do some Q&A is Urania, which is what our whole thing was on tonight. But, I did have this focus on Uranian astrology, which is in part created by Urania, the goddess. Two other areas affected by her that directly correlate with her is cosmobiology. Cosmobiology is the scientific discipline that is concerned with the correlations between the cosmos and organic life, so us, right? And the effects of the cosmic rhythms and the stellar motion on us, on man, and all the potentials and all the dispositions that can exist, how it affects our character, how it affects our fate in terms of fate. And it researches these correlations and these effects. So cosmobiology is very connected to Urania. I'm not saying go out and take a cosmobiology class or try to understand a book, but it is something to take into consideration. It's a big word. It sounds hard, but really this is a human theory. This is about how do the stars affect human beings? How do the stars develop our character, control our fate? How does it change our fate? So it is galaxy magic, celestial magic. It is Uranian astrology. Has this fancy technical term called cosmobiology. You can actually get a degree in it in a reputable school. The other thing I wanted to talk about was solar arcs. Solar arcs are Uranian in nature, really, they are. So solar arc is the direction. It's one of the oldest predictive techniques in astrology, first of all. It actually predates Uranian astrology. It's defined as the difference between the position of your progressed sun and your natal sun on any given day. And if you're not real familiar with astrology, I know that probably is like, what does that mean? So it's a positional thing. Where is your sun right now? Where is your sun transiting and progressing, and what kind of effect is happening because of that? So this arc, the solar arc, is then added to every planet and every point in your chart, including a midpoint tree. So this arc is usually approximate to the equivalent of your age as well. So solar arcs are Uranian. They are connected to Urania. I do a lot of progressions and I do look at progressions. Um, I like doing, I do like doing solar charts, but again, I like looking at a big canvas. I want to see 3 or 4 different charts. I want to look at correlations first, and I want to focus on correlations. And then I will start filling in the gaps by looking at things like solar arcs, solar returns, and all of these things that also play a part. One other thing I wanted to tell you, I actually took a screenshot on my phone is again, I told you guys I use Solar Fire. I think it's the best program for astrologers out there, whether you're a newbie or you're advanced. The math is 100%. Not every site, some sites out there that are doing charts, the math is not mathing. So the math has to be accurate, and the math astrology is hard. So Solar Fire has very accurate math. And if you wanted to do this in Solar Fire, if you have access to it, all you have to do is access the charts, reports, and tabulations. Go in there. It'll give you a drop-down box. Just scroll down to where it says midpoint trees. Select that. Then you can select to generate the chart. You're going to have to enter your information. It'll generate the chart. It'll display all the midpoints between all the astrological points. And then there is a function on there that says adjust modulus and orb. So you can adjust the angle and the tolerance, which is the modulus and the orb, to specifically how close a midpoint needs to be to that planet to be included in your tree. And so I would change that to 1 degree to make sure that it's an orb of influence. Otherwise, you're going to be getting all kinds of, orbs, and some of them have no influence and they may sound scary and get you worked up. But if it's a 13-degree orb, who cares? It's not going to do anything, right? You're looking at the 1-degree orb. Those are the things that are going to affect things. So that's, if you have access to Solar Fire, what I would recommend doing. Thank you for listening to me ramble. Okay, so let me stop sharing this and then we will do some Q&A. All right. Questions, feedback, anything at all, I'm here for you. Wait, has anybody got anything for me?
So I remember you saying like you make minimum 3 separate charts for a person to really figure them out. Mm-hmm. And one of them's the natal chart, right?
Yeah. So the first one is Placidius geocentric natal, right? That's the first one I'll look at. That's Western astrology. Okay. The second chart I want to look at is your Vedic D9. So the Vedic D9, the reason this chart is so important, now it doesn't activate till midlife. This chart, the energy that it is explaining is going to surface itself in your late 30s to early 40s. But that change, that shifts. It's an energy shift that takes place for all of us. And so I want to see what your D9 looks like, because then that gives me a good idea of what's coming. The third chart I want to look at is called second harmonics. This is evolutionary medieval astrology. But here's the thing with second harmonics. Second harmonics has been proven for decades to be a very solid, viable, validative predestination chart. This shows us what we incarnated here to do. If I'm looking at death axis, or if I'm looking at death transits, I'm looking at your second harmonics, because I probably can tell when and how you're going to die. Not that we're supposed to do that, but in some cases I have, like if somebody has a relative on hospice and they're just kind of lingering and the family's strained and they need to know when to expect closure for that person to end their suffering, for them to stop suffering, I may go ahead and do that for them. It's not something I traditionally do, but that is a place to find that. And of course, there's other good information in there, predestination. What are you born in with? What's your past life trauma? What's your epigenetics that you're coming in here with in this incarnation? So those 3 charts, I talk too much and then I talk like this. Those 3 charts are probably, in my book, the most important charts for me to look at to really fully understand you as a person, to know what's going on, to know what's gone on in the past, maybe even that you're carrying with you, and what to expect going forward into the future without even having to look at your transits. Um, Additional reports that I'll start looking at. Um, if you're somebody having some troubles, if you're needing clarity, other reports I'm going to look at. I'm going to look at your locational astrology. I'm going to pull up an astro map, my cartography program. I'm going to look at the planetary influences of where you're at right now. Some people move to places or are living in places that just aren't good for them from a planetary perspective. It brings in heavy Mars energy that's unfiltered by any benefits. You have very heavy, maybe you have a stunted or a blocked up Mercury, so you're in a location where you're going to suffer in terms of having a work or a job. So I look at locational astrology. Where are you? What's the planetary influence? Then I'm going to look at, I mean, obviously the midpoint tree, we just talked about that. There are other things I'll look at. If somebody is really in a funk, I'm going to probably pull up their solar return. I'm probably going to pull up, if there's other people involved, I'm going to probably want to look at their charts and see how their energy is affecting your energy and what the friction is there. So there's a lot of things I look at. I think any good astrologer, and if you're interested in astrology, you need to be very open to the different modalities because they each serve a very unique purpose. I can't tell you how many astrologers I see on TikTok or I see on these one-off weird websites where they're just looking at a Vedic system and Vedic is God and this is it. The houses are gods and blah, 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 blah. It doesn't work that way. All right. It just doesn't work that way. I'm very omnistic, but the universe is omnistic, right? It has many different energies and belief systems that feed into those. So you need to be open enough to look at the different modalities of astrology to analyze a person fully. That was a very long answer to a short question. I'm so sorry. But
it's okay. This is giving me more stuff to do.
well, you're good at math though, Lisa. This is right up your Lisa is the
only
one
to be honest, I do the same thing as you. I go online, I find the people that already have the math programmed and I use their things.
And that is the best way to do it. And I'll tell you why, because back in the day, okay, late 90s, 1997, and I'm not shitting you, 1997, when I was making charts, I was using a compass and a ruler and pieces of scrap paper and like calculators and frustration and tears and blood and crying and drinking. Okay, because that's how intense it was back in the mid to late 90s before all this software came out and you had to do the math.
I thought you just went and you bought like the books from your local New Age shop.
Yes,
pre-calculated.
So nope. What you would do is you would go out and you would buy the books. I still have some of my books. They're probably worth money somewhere, but you would buy the books and the books would give you the formulas. But every individual is unique and different. We were all born in different places, different times. So there was no, it's not like you could go and buy like a star map, like a star chart. You had to sit down and calculate like the hard calculations, and you would have to draw your grids and you would have to draw your house systems and you would have to make sure your orbs were exactly aligned to where they were supposed to be. So it was very complex. And then software started coming out, changed the whole game, right? But some of the first surges of software, the math was wrong. So now you're making shit charts that, I mean, what else? They're shit because if the math's not right, the aspects aren't right. And there's still some of that out there. You got to be careful what sites you're on. The math isn't always right. Astro.com, I think, is pretty good. I love SolarFire. Like, so I really, SolarFire, any type of chart I want, I know the math is 100%. And the harder the chart, the harder the math. When you're doing harmonics charts, you're looking at quincunxes and sesquisquares. Okay, listen, the math is hard. I have to have a computer do it for me. So SolarFire all the way for the win.
I do want to tell everybody a fun fact that calculus was invented to help people do astrology.
Really? I did not know that. That's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, because what it was is I'm trying to think like what's his face who did calculus. It was to yeah, because he was like one of the royal astrologers and needed to like do the math and
That's
everything. And
awesome.
one of the things is like the planets are moving, and calculus is all about being able to like solve things, you know, when there's like rates of change, like
Right.
speeding up, slowing down, and everything. So
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't know that. That's a good fact. That's a little factoid I'm gonna log
yeah,
away
yeah.
in there.
So a lot of the academic types are just like, oh, math, it's like so pure and whatever, and I'm just kind of all like, it was calculus was invented by astrologers.
And it makes sense because honestly, calculus, I don't know what all the math is, but it's insane math. Like I said, like the higher up the harmonics you go, the harder the math. But here's the thing though, it's worth it because of the accuracy. I always say the harder the math in the chart, the more accurate that chart's going to be because you're really breaking it down. You're breaking it down to the sesquisquares or quincunxes. And you know that, I mean, that is, there's no wiggle room there. Like, this is the energy. Like, it ain't going nowhere, so it's accurate. But yeah, that's awesome. All right. Any other questions, comments, feedback on any of this? I like constructive criticism. Did I ramble too much? Was it too much information for one session? Like, was it digestible? Do any of you think you might use this, or what do you guys think of?
I think this was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Yeah, I'm in the process of developing a I'm I'm working with WD Gang Freemasonry for my charting,
That's
and
awesome.
it's been working out quite lovely, I would say, along with the radionics, and I'm getting a lot of ideas. And I was wondering how I could apply somehow the harmonics frequency with what I'm creating.
That's an excellent question. So, radionics is a wonderful form of Uranian magic. So,
Ah,
in radionics, you guys know we use quantum energy and we use frequency and vibration, basically to change things, right? To alter the energies, to kind of create scenarios. There is actually, if you look at like presets, like for what I do, I have presets, and that is kind of like a preset vibration and frequency to activate something. And so there are
mm,
there are planetary presets. So if you're working on your chart and you want to incorporate some element of that. So say you want to activate your Jupiter and your Jupiter isn't due to activate for 2.5 years
yeah.
and you need that Jupiter to activate. You can use radionics to do a Jupiter cast. So what that is going to do is basically lift up the frequency and vibration to mimic an activation point with Jupiter. It's not going to be a true activation point, but it's going to mimic it enough to create or produce that energy. So that's a good question. So quantum energy you can use as a mimic energy. I know some people are like, that's not the way you're supposed to use it. But listen,
I don't care.
right, exactly. That's why they exist. That's why the planetary aspects in radionics exist, is because a
It's
lot of
not that
people
much.
they're looking to like activate those points. So yeah, that makes sense. Yes.
Okay, that'll be very helpful then. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. I'm so glad to see you tonight, by the way.
Likewise, likewise.
Awesome. So anybody
I'm
else?
sorry, I didn't know that I was not on mute, and I just looked over at Jeff and said, this is not devil shit, Jeff," because he always thinks
I
Jeff
didn't even hear
is
you say
like,
that. That was hilarious, though. See, we're
here's
not
the Jeff.
worshiping the devil in
I
here,
was
Jeff.
you know what, the little bit I heard, I was
Right.
very impressed with the presentation.
Oh, well, thank you. Was Jeff listening to the whole thing?
No, I was in my room, but I had the
Oh,
door open, and he was in the den, and he was doing some work, but he could hear. I had it loud enough where he could hear a lot of it. So,
well,
I
good.
was thinking, wow, she's a good presenter. I was thinking, wow, she's a good presenter.
Oh, well, thank you. You should let me do your chart. I could do you and Sherry's chart and look at,
I
or
was
maybe
thinking you could
not.
start
Maybe,
writing my
maybe we.
morning meetings at work. So,
Well, I'm glad to have you, Jeffy.
well, I'm glad to be kind of part
So funny.
He is a funny Jeff.
All right. Anything else? Does anybody have anything else? I'm here for it.
Well, it was a
No?
lot of information, like most of it I hadn't heard before. And so it's a lot to digest for somebody who hasn't had anything to do with this. But, I mean, if you send me those things, the slides, then
Yeah.
I'll look at them again, and yeah. And then I do think it would be fun to do charts for sure. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I
It
absolutely
is
do.
fun. I love it. And I mean, I'm a diehard. I started making charts, like I said, mid 90s, probably around 94, 95. And when I started making charts, I made them with a compass and a ruler and a calculator. And now things, technology is wonderful. Like I don't have to do that anymore. And so I'm able to look at more charts. Like if you had asked me to do a harmonics back in the mid 90s, forget it. It wasn't happening. I was giving you a Placidius and that was going to be it. And we'll talk about it. But now, we have the technology to go in and get the math done for us. So it's very easy to kick out these charts. And I got to tell you guys, like, especially Sherry, you're kind of new to the astrology thing. When you have 3 or 4 charts sitting in front of you and they're your chart and you're seeing correlations in each chart, it really validates. It validates how you feel. It validates the decisions you're making. It's a beautiful tool because those charts, they give us a glimpse into a part of ourselves that we don't maybe have an awareness of, like our motivators. Sometimes we all have internal motivators that we can't pinpoint. Like, why am I acting this way? Why am I doing this? It's a great awareness tool. It also, I'll tell you, as a divinator, as a practitioner, I use them to get in front of things. That's my job, is to get in front of what's coming. Transits and progressions of any single report. I don't care if it's your Placidius, your harmonics, your D, your mid-tree. My function as a practitioner is to find out what's coming, what's happening, when, and get in front of it. That's my job. That's why I'm here. That's why I've been given the gifts I've been given, right? So for me, the more charts I have to pull information, the more confident I am of getting in front of something and rerouting that energy, redirecting it, or finding a loophole or something to work around whatever's coming if I don't like it, or to enhance something good that's coming. Can work both ways, to really amplify something positive. So I mean, astrology is an important tool for the toolbox. I can't stress it enough. But
yeah, I mean, you're obviously been doing this a long time, and you're one of the most self-aware people I know, and that's probably has something to do with this.
Thanks. It is. It is. Like I can tell you, like, and I know, like, there's a lot of naysayers out there, right? Here's the thing, I go back, like, and you each can do this to test your own theories. I had something happen to me when I was 14. It was like just it was from like a couple of weeks before my 14th birthday, and it lasted a couple of weeks after my 14th birthday. So it was a period of 4 to 6 weeks. And this thing that happened was a huge, huge, huge thing. And I went back, and this is the other thing too, you can go back and you can look at what your transits and progressions were at any specific point in your life. I went all the way back to that month, 2 weeks before, 2 weeks after my 14th birthday, to look at what was going on a planetary level when I was experiencing this thing. And I shit you not, it really explained why I was in crisis. My Mars and Saturn were activated. They were squared. They were, there was retrograde activity. There was so many, Mercury was in a state of disenchantment. It was in a really bad placement. There was so much going on in Pluto. My Pluto was, I call it in death mode. There's certain aspects of the planet Pluto that I look for, what is it interacting with? It creates some form of death. Usually it's a spiritual death so that you can be reawakened, which is what happened to me. It's like my spirit died, but then you rise from the ashes like a phoenix, right? So I look at all those things, right? And when I looked back, it was so validating to me because the proof is in the pudding, right? Like, look at what my planetary activity was. This is why that happened. You know, like there's a rhyme and a reason to it. It's like the cosmos already know the universe has predestined some of this stuff, some stuff we can't avoid, even with magic, right? I can't tell you, I've had cases where I've thrown everything but the kitchen sink at it and I can't move the energy. It happens. Sometimes something is karmic and it cannot be avoided. But it's there, it's in your chart. So I say, think back to when you were a kid. Think of a traumatic event that happened. Try to remember the date range, like within a month, and go back in your chart and look and see what was happening with your transits and progressions, because I bet you there was some shitty shit happening. I bet you Pluto, Saturn, Mars, they were having like a field day of some sort, like, in, you know, in the universe at that time, right? So I always say validate it, you know, validate what you're feeling and seeing. It's in your chart. It's in your chart. It always is. So, all right, you guys. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to cut you loose. It's 9:15. Again, any questions, shoot me an email. I'm here for it, but I'm going to be doing the 9 Muses service in the morning. So if you guys have any petitions, make sure you just get them to me tonight by midnight so I can make sure it's included. And then I will be, you know, sending out the videos and photos as soon as it concludes. And again, you know, this service looks different. It's not sacred fire. I use water and I also use sound. So I use a throat chakra singing bowl and I use a chime board to make sure that the activation is received well by the muses. The muses don't receive fire very well like the other deities. So we don't want to scare them off with fire. But yeah, other than that, just shoot me an email if you guys need anything at all. And thank you again so much.
Thanks, Mish.
All right, you guys have a good night.
You too.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.